Uh, Lovely to see all of you here on this winter evening. I think the subject of this panel is elections. It's a very broad subject, so we can have fun with that, I think. Um, I thought of starting with the first question for both you, Mark and Ram, one by one. If you could talk about your first memory of an Indian election, you know, or in your case, your first memory of an election, per se. So what was it like? Can you make it vivid and detailed and give us an idea that, elections have been going on for a long time and they are in our memory and they play strange games in our memory. So can I ask you that first?
Well, you can, is this thing working?
I think it is.
Well, you can certainly say elections have been going on for a long time, and I've been watching them since 1967, which is a pretty long time. And I'd just like to give one brief answer. The first election I covered, I remember speaking to a man in Uttar Pradesh who was digging a ditch, and a very simple man. And I asked him who he was going to vote for, and he gave me a very simple answer in which he said, "What does it matter who I vote for? He'll only put my vote in his belly." So from that, I learned a lesson about elections in India, that although a large number of people go to vote, a large number of them also go with a great deal of cynicism.
That reminds me, when we had the Mamata elections, I call it, we were waiting for Rahul Gandhi to appear at a rally and in Murshidabad, and one guy said, যা হবে হবে কিন্তু এখানে একটা সাইকেল থেকে স্কুটারে যাবে কিন্তু স্কুটার থেকে গাড়ি অবধি যেতে পারবে না whatever happens with the elections, one or two people from here might be able to buy a scooter instead of a bicycle, but they will not be able to reach a motor car. But Ram, what's your first memory?
Well, it's also the 67 elections.
Really? But you were 8 years old.
I was 9 years old. It comes from my hometown.
I was a bit older.
It comes from my hometown, Dehradun, and it's actually a verse. Not a very good verse, but it's a verse I heard shouted on the streets. It ran, जनसंघ को वोट दो, बीड़ी पीना छोड़ दो. It goes on. जनसंघ को वोट दो, बीड़ी पीना छोड़ दो, बीड़ी में तंबाकू है, कांग्रेस वाला डाकू है. Actually, I was just remembering.
Can you translate that for the non-Hindi speakers here? Obviously,
Well,
I
I
can see.
think this is not Chennai, but do you need does anyone need a translation? No. All right.
Okay.
No, I was just remembering this, and it struck me that it's utterly irrelevant. Congress wala daku hai.
They needed to get the rhyme, right?
Okay, but and the Jansangh bidi mein tambaku hai, bidi pina chhod do. And the Jansangh still wants us to give up all kinds of things, right? There's still a lot of Puritans and a lot of thieves on the other side. Right?
No, I just wondered, and how did that change for you? Because you were covering elections from 1967, the next ones would have been 72, then 77. Can you give us a run-through of, you were a journalist, you were in weird positions, you were kicked out of the country by that master of elections, Indira Gandhi, and so on and so forth. Can you give us a brief graph of how you think from 67 to, where are we now, 2014?
Well, I think it'd be very boring if I tried to go all the way through.
No, give us the highlights.
I'd probably get my memory, get it all muddled up. But I think the big thing is that each election that I have covered has been very different from the other ones. There have been trends which you have noticed going through. You've noticed that the decline in the position of the Congress Party from being virtually inevitably the winner, although of course in 67 it did suffer massive setbacks, but to the Congress Party being maybe first among equals and not even always first among equals. So that's been one change. But I think the abiding memory still goes back to what I said at the start, that the amazing number of people who will come out and vote, knowing perfectly well, or in their hearts of hearts, that nothing major is going to change. And the other thing which sticks in my mind about elections is something which Jaswant Singh said to me once, when he said, having been defeated in, I think it was the 98 election, He said, I've discovered that we MPs are nothing more than facilitators. And although we journalists, we write about right wing, we write about left wings, we write about castes, we find all sorts of reasons for people voting. But actually, in the end, I've found that the basic reason people vote in rural areas is, if I could use two Hindi phrases, ye mera admi hai, he thinks, and the other one is, wo mera kaam karega. And when you speak to people very often and ask them why they're not voting for the sitting candidate, the answer will be, wo mera kaam nahi kiya. So I think that a lot of these things which we write into elections actually are not as important. And what is really important for an MP, it seems to me, is that enough people think that he has or she has done their work for them. That may be very cynical, but that's the way I see it.
Ram, Dehradun, I somehow failed to grasp that Dehradun was your hometown, because I thought
Born
it
there and raised there, yeah.
right. Very strange, very different now that it's become a state capital and the elections are run from there, presumably. Do you go there a lot?
Well, I'm now in Bangalore.
Yeah, but
and
do you
I've been
visit
around
Dehradun?
I visit there a lot. And the first chief minister of Uttarakhand was a classmate of my uncle, Nityanand Swami, as it happens. So I do have that connection. But I'd like to, since we are in Kolkata, I'd like to say a little bit about my understanding of elections, which is very different from Mark's, because I'm a historian, I sit in archives and libraries, and Mark is on the road and in the street and in the field. And when I was researching the history of post-independent India,
Mike, closer to the mic.
when I was researching the history of post-independence India, I came across this extraordinary man who is a great Indian hero, also a great Bengali hero, but the Bengalis usually recognize the wrong people as their heroes, as I'll explain. His name was Sukumar Sen, and he was our first election commissioner. And he was in the ICS, and when the constitution was passed in January 1950, Nehru wanted elections very soon. Essentially, universal adult franchise came to India largely because of Jawaharlal Nehru. The communists opposed it, the RSS opposed it, the middle class opposed it. No one wanted the poor to vote.
On what grounds?
Well, the communists opposed it because they wanted a one-party state. The RSS opposed it because it was a Western invention. The middle class thought that poor people couldn't, didn't have the brains or the wit, as many of them still think, to exercise their franchise. So Nehru wanted elections quickly to show that we were a proper democracy. So the constitution was promulgated in January, and Nehru told Sukumar Sen, I want elections by July or August 1950. Now, Sukumar Sen, unlike Nehru, was a mathematician with a gold medal from Imperial College London. So he worked out the mechanics. 300 million people, 180 million voters, no polling booths, no polling stations. How do you make a muster roll of everyone eligible to vote? How do you make sure that they are properly accounted for? Where do you cite the polling stations? And he went back to Nehru and said, if you want a proper election, you have to give me 18 months. Nehru agreed. So the first elections were then held because of Sukumar Sen in December, January 51, 52. And they were extremely well held. He really is an unsung hero of Indian democracy because although what Marx says is true, that elections are often instrumental, narrow-minded in the way people vote and the way people ask for votes, the conduct, the organization is relatively smooth. And a lot has to do with this pragmatic Bengali. I mean, if I may use an oxymoron, this pragmatic Bengali, who organized these elections. Among his innovations, that he has forgotten, among his innovations was the symbol. Because since 60% of your electorate was illiterate, you couldn't have names and parties, so you had to invent symbols. Another one of his innovations is because he recognized the uneasy compact Hindus and Indians have with morality, was the indelible ink on the finger, which I don't think you have in England, Mark.
No.
So, all right. Now, he conducted the 52 elections and the 57 elections successfully. And, without him, we wouldn't be standing there discussing the 2014 elections. And it's a matter of great shame that, among other things, there's no street named after him in Kolkata. Maybe Mamta Banerjee should get her act together.
Yeah, could I just add something to what Ram has said. I absolutely agree with Ram on one thing, and I don't want anyone to think that because I believe that, in a way, people vote in a very pragmatic way, that does not mean that I don't entirely believe that it is a wonderful achievement of this country and of more sense to have decided to have universal franchise. I remember hearing you speaking in London once and pointing out very rightly how long it had taken America and Britain to achieve universal franchise, and you went straight into it. And I would, no matter what the motive for people voting, it is still a wonderful thing that you went into it and that you are still practicing this universal franchise. On the Election Commission, I would just like to add something as well. I think that what has happened to the Election Commission over the years is enormously encouraging, because it shows that at least in one institution in this country there can be real progress. And the changes which have taken place in the elections, the making of them fairer and fairer, is a real credit to that institution, the Election Commission. If I could just tell you a very quick story about a famous psephologist called David Butler. He used to come out here, some of you must have seen him, and appear on Prannoy Roy's programs. And he said to me, I've heard an awful lot about this rigging business. So how can I see it? So I said to my colleague, Satish Jacob, I said, just take him down to Bagpat in the heart of the Jat country and he will see it. And sure enough, the next day in the Times London, there appeared a pained article in which David Butler said the phrase I'd never heard before, which I thought was a rather lovely phrase. He said, as I said, you could almost feel the tears running down his cheek as he wrote, I have for the first time seen vote stealing. Which
Have you ever seen vote stealing, Ram?
Well, I have a story about that, and then I'll come back to the history. Maybe we'll give you the history. You see, as with many Indian institutions, the Election Commission, which was well set up, started declining. And in the 60s and 70s, you had, in particular in UP and Bihar, booth capturing, vote rigging, and that kind of stuff. And T.N. Session, in the late 80s, revives the Election Commission. And then it gets cleaned up, and then through the use of technology now, it's very hard to steal an election or even to rig votes. But in the middle, there was. And in 1977, maybe I should mention, it's okay if I mention names, right?
Absolutely, please, that's why you're here.
So my first memory of my first election was, as I said, 67 as a boy in Dehradun. Then there was 71, I don't remember very much of that. Probably because I was more interested in Vishwanath and Chandrasekhar, who were then winning the test series in England.
Gavaskar also.
Gavaskar also. 77, I was a student in Delhi University during the emergency in which Mark was kicked out. And then, of course, the emergency was lifted and elections were announced. The day of the voting, I was 19 and not eligible to vote because then the vote was 21. All right. Now, so I was sleeping late, and the idea was when counting happens, we'll go and watch the counting on Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg, where they used to put up all those boards. But the day of the voting, I didn't queue up early. I was sleeping, and I was woken up in my hostel room by someone who was then my friend. I'm proud to say he's no longer my friend. His name is Chandan Mitra of the BJP. And he woke me up and said, Ram, chalo yaar, vote dena hai. We have to vote. Now, incidentally, since I've said a nasty thing about Chandan, I should say a nice thing.
Why?
Because it's relevant. He's almost the only Bengali I know who, when he speaks Hindi, gets his gender and tense correct. So that's very nice. That's good.
This is true. This is true.
All right. So he woke me up in the morning. He said, Ram, chalo yaar, vote dena hai. I said, kya yaar? I'm not in the. I'm 90. He said, whoa. You will vote on behalf of, Ram Sevak, who is dead, and we've got it fixed. We have to get Indira Gandhi out, and you'll give a fictitious vote. And so I was still a bourgeois Brahmin from Tamil Nadu who hated telling a lie. So I went back to sleep. So Chandan went to my neighbor.
So actually told him to go away.
And so Chandan woke up my neighbor and took him along, it said.
And no one discovered them.
No one discovered.
So, you were friends also with, I'll segue back to you in a minute. But you're also friends at that time with Swapan Dasgupta, great cephalogist. How do you, this is Calcutta. We've known Chandan Mitra and Chopin for a long time. And this kind of shift, normally we think BJP, right-wingers, these people who are, they're all, bhaiyas and gujjus and this kind of stuff. How do you explain that two of the BJP's biggest apologists, ideologues, happen to be, English-speaking representatives, happen to be two famous sons of Calcutta, so to speak, who were close friends of yours at one point?
Well,
Just about, and they're totally involved with mainstream and elections and all that. Give us an insight into that,
Well,
maybe.
I'll tell a story because it involves the two of them and a third person, Paranjoy Gua Thakurta. They all joined my college in Delhi University together. They were 2 years senior to me, and I was ragged by them my first day in college, and I've known them ever since. So I've known
What
them
did they
since,
do? What did they do to you?
Well, they probably asked me to, who was my favorite philosopher, some stupid, innocuous Bengali question. But anyway, they were known in St. Stephen's as 5, 6, and 7. Because, Sandeep Roy, who was in your session, who conducted your session just before, said he'd never known a Calcuttan who came second in university. Now, the obsession with marks. So they were known as 5, 6, and 7 because Chandan got 5 points in his ISC, Chopin got 6, and Paranjoy got 7. They were classmates. They all fled Calcutta to study in Delhi. And they were always known as 5, 6, and 7. Now, I've known them now, 40 years this year. Towards the end of my time in university, towards the end of the 70s, when we were getting politicized, Chandan was in the CPM and Chopin was a Trotskyist. And they used to call their friend Paranjoy, they all became journalists. And I actually owe them a lot because when I started writing for the newspapers, as an academic writing for newspapers, 5, 6, and 7 all helped me. So in many ways, despite our political disagreements, I think I must acknowledge this debt. Anyway, in the early 80s and through the...
Paranjoy was the most right-wing of the three, was it?
Yeah, that's the point. Till the early mid-80s, from the late 70s to the mid-80s, Chandan of the CPM and Chopin of the Trotskyist used to contemptuously dismiss Paranjoy, their classmate, as a bourgeois liberal. Today, they call him a loony leftist. He's actually stayed exactly where he was.
Exactly where he was. Have you had people, who you knew in the 70s and the 80s, have you seen them shift, this dynamic shift from being a trot to a raving Modiite, this kind of total coming out into like gender change, if almost one could say. Do you have stories about people like that? You can name names if you like.
Well, I know both Chandan and Swapan very well, and perhaps I don't take such an uncharitable view of them as some people do. I better not say this, otherwise it's a bit unfair to
go on.
if I say it. But
No,
they're not.
You're among friends,
but,
a small intimate circle here.
No, I haven't actually known anyone really who has swung radically. But what I do find strange is that is in India the way that people do go to extremes in their views, and that the leftists pour utter scorn on the BJP and the BJPs pour utter scorn on the leftists and the Congress, and there is no meeting of mind, whereas, of course, you have the famous argumentative India, where they should all be dialoguing with each other, and you see this ghastly spectacle on your television.
But you can't
set
imagine Tony
every
Benn and
night,
Margaret Thatcher dialoguing with each other. You have
but Margaret
Arthur
Thatcher's
Scargill.
English. She's not
No,
Indian.
no, I'm talking about
you know.
England. There's animosity and great anger.
No,
And
you missed my point. My point is that if you've got the argumentative Indian, you should be having more argumentative politics, yeah, rather than this shouting at each
Abusive
other.
politics.
Yeah. So that's what strikes me when you talk about your friends, being on extremes. When you see the television, all you see is people taking totally opposite and rigid stands.
Interesting that you brought up television. And I still haven't seen the Rahul Gandhi interview with Mr. Dornob Goswami. Sorry, what's his name again? I beg your pardon. So the point is, that somebody said to Derek O'Brien, again, I'm bringing back the last time we flirted with elections in this state. I think it was a journalist who said to him and to the young CPM ideologue who was having this debate in the town hall that, look, Mr. O'Brien, if you're going to win these elections, you're going to have to be collegiate and involve the left front in governing this state. Otherwise, if you're just going to sideline them and isolate them the way you accuse them of having done the Congress and the Trinamool, nothing is going to progress. And at that time, I remember Derek O'Brien saying, of course we will consult them. Of course we will take them along. They have to understand that when we win, and he was very confident, and of course they won. But do you get this feeling that Indian politics and Indian parliament, Indian state legislatures actually is more of a brawl, that there's no sense of, okay, you're in the opposition, you've lost, but we still need to have a dialogue with you? That sense has never been there. It's almost like we've slaughtered you, now sit there quietly till you get up and slaughter us. Do you get that feeling, or do you have memories or examples of when different opposition parties were actually in dialogue while being in opposition with each other? But it was like a proper democracy, if you like.
Of course, my memories, it's more as a historian. Certainly, there were, at least till the 1970s, you had a dialogue. Essentially, a democracy functions best when the two rival parties at least maintain a certain degree of trust in each other's motives. It's not always claiming that they're doing this under malevolent intentions. At the 50s and 60s, yes, I mean,